today that we're going to be interviewing former Member of Parliament Edwina Currie. And on the other side, at 8:30, we're going to be interviewing Nadia Whitmore, the Member of Parliament of Nottingham. So we're going to be having an exclusive interview with both of these, one former MP and one current MP. We're very excited. We're going to be back very, very soon. It's going to be amazing. The Political Times, I have us ever live radio around Nottingham. It's a great show. The Political Times will be interviewing all current members of parliament, all people in news editors, politicians, etc. It's going to be an amazing experience. Please tune in to the Political Times every Tuesday at 7 o'clock. Stay tuned. In the next 4 or 5 minutes, we're going to be interviewing Edwina Currie, which will be on the Political Times on Radio Fazal. So stay tuned, and we'll be back very soon. We are just waiting now for Edwina Currie, who will be on radio very, very soon. We are very excited to have her on, and yeah, it's going to be an amazing experience. Now, guys, I want to ask you one thing. While you're here listening to this show, The Political Times, can I ask you, is there anybody out there who can tweet us today? Facebook, it could be your opinion about former Prime Minister, be about Liz Truss. I always think on this show we should ask direct and straight questions to politicians, not to be controversy, not to be rude, but to be politically correct, impartial in our show. Our show, The Political Times, is impartial. We're here to serve the community, but at the same time, we're also here to ask the right questions. And this is a show live every single week, Tuesday at 7 o'clock. So please stay tuned once again, and we will be with you very, very shortly.
Are we in? Are we in? We are. Good. Hi.
Edwina.
Yeah. Hi. Oh, well, that was a bit hair-raising.
Hi, Edwina. Hi. Good to see you again. How are you?
I'm fine.
We're very happy to have you on today. You are live right now in Nottingham. No problem at all. No problem.
Well,
are you there? Are you there? Can you hear us? Perfect. Edwina, first of all, I wanted to say thank you very much for coming on today.
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Perfect, Edwina. No, perfect. Thank you. First of all, I want to say thank you very much for coming on Radio Fazar. We're very honoured and very privileged to have you on. So thank you so much for your time on Radio Fazar on the brand new show, The Political Times. So thank you very much for coming once again. Thank you. So Edwina, I want to ask you your first question, and I liked as a person like yourself who very heavily involved in politics for numerous of years. My first question to you is, tell me your opinion about the current government status.
Okay, you keep freezing, but I think you're asking me my opinion about the current government status. Is that right? So my own feeling is it's always much nicer to be ahead in the polls than behind in the polls, which is where the government is at the moment. I'm the president of the Conservative Association where I live, so I do what I can to help. And actually, I think Rishi Sunak is doing quite well. I can imagine ways in which I'd like him to do even better. But I think he's trying to govern in a sensible way. That's not always a popular way, but I think he's being very sensible. He's been sensible, for example, to push back some of the net zero things, because the burden on ordinary families, on households, was getting really so onerous. And making some changes at this stage will make it more certain that we get to net zero in future. So I agree with him about that. And I have an electric car and I have solar panels, so I'm very green. I was disappointed and sad that we ended up with only half of HS2, because I live in the north of England. I live near Manchester, and places like Manchester and Crewe would have gained a great deal from having that, as indeed would Leeds. But the cost had just got so out of control that it was insane, and it makes more sense, as he has decided, to spend the £36 billion on other forms of transport. And I think that's a very good thing. I like the idea of kids not being able to vape anymore, and I like the idea of cutting back on smoking without actually banning it. So he's got some very good ideas. What I would like him to do is not have such tight trousers. It becomes a distraction when he's having his photo taken. But I think any country would be very lucky to have somebody like Rishi Sunak as its prime minister, because he is so intelligent. He's such a decent bloke. He thinks and cares so much. And he has been so very successful in his life already that he knows what makes that happen. And I think he can enable that to happen for far more people. So I think he's doing okay so far.
Brilliant. Now, my other question is, What do you think about the energy crisis happening right now? As you know, millions of people in the UK are suffering, energy crisis. People can't, afford to, heat their houses up, etc. Fuel prices have gone up. Tell me what your opinion is, and do you think the government is working on this, but also understanding that people are having financial difficulties?
This winter will be better than last winter. Last winter was just awful. I get combined bill for gas and electricity in this little old house. You can see it's an old cottage in Derbyshire. And my bill went from £216 up to over £500 in the matter of a month during September last year. This September, it's come down to about £350, which is still a great deal more than it was 2 years ago, but even so, it's not as bad as last year. I'm glad that the government was able to help people, and particularly help those in the greatest need. And I hope everybody claims who is entitled to claim. But what we can't do is, I think, subsidize everybody out of making changes. One of the changes I did was I went around the house turning everything off, and realizing how much stuff we have kind of running in the background that we don't normally use. And then I got some of that foam back silver foil, which you can get in any hardware store or on Amazon, very, very cheap. And I stuck it behind the radiators, and immediately all the rooms were a lot warmer. And then, as you can see, I'm dressed in layers. So I'm trying to practice what I preach. We have to get some changes in household behavior. We have to get people using less. And if people use a bit less, if the people who can afford to use a bit less, then the price comes down. At the same time, we're seeing rapid changes in policy. I live in Derbyshire. In Derby, we have Rolls-Royce. Rolls-Royce makes small modular nuclear reactors. In January, the government is going to announce which companies have got the contracts to do that. And the first will come on stream in 2030. That's the quickest you can build them. Now, that sounds like a long way ahead, but it does guarantee us cheaper energy for many decades to come. And I think that fact alone starts to bring down prices.
Brilliant. I also want to go into more detail. I mean, I know you've spoken about energy crisis, but the fuel issue has really taken a turn on people, with economical issues, etc. Do you worry about that, about the fuel consumption, the fuel liters, the liter every single time I go to, then it goes down, then it's 10p, then it goes 20p. Every single time the fuel consumption goes higher, lower, higher, lower. What can you tell us about this?
Well, I agree absolutely. And although I've got an electric car, which means that I can drive past a petrol station and not even be bothered that it goes from 130 to 160 pence a litre, the fact is that affects everything I buy. Every delivery van, every vehicle is using fuel. And we can't avoid that. That feeds into general inflation, and particularly in the stuff that we get delivered, every day, all the food in particular. It's not affecting clothes prices quite so much, but then I don't buy clothes very much. But I noticed, I did a Tesco order online today, and it was eye-watering. I mean, the price of food is still extremely high, and it shows no sign of really coming down yet. Now, how much of this is due to the war in Ukraine? Quite a lot. And it's intended, I think Mr. Putin is trying to cause us grief. How much is happening as the problems in Israel-Palestine? Again, same sort of thing. I see Putin's hand in everything. I'm a real conspiracy theorist when it comes to him. And fomenting war in the Middle East again has exactly the effect of pushing up spot prices for oil and for gas. And that damages the nations like ours and other democracies. So all I would say is, look, we have to come through this and we have to help each other as much as possible. I pay my taxes. I know a lot of my taxes then go to help other people who are in greater need, thank God, than I am. And I'm glad to see that that help is available.
Brilliant. Talk to me. I know that you said recently you spoke about Rishi Sunak and your opinion about him being a great prime minister for United Kingdom. Everyone's entitled to their opinion, which is great. Talk to me about the XL bullies that have been banned across the UK. Do you think, in your opinion, it's a right decision? And also, it was never thought in the past or the history in the UK, because dogs every 10 years, something's always either right that Sunak has banned the XL bully.
Well, the XL bully dog is bred and used for dog fighting, which is illegal. And it's a cruel and horrible thing that's been banned in Britain for over a century. But that's what they're being bred for. Some forms of Staffordshire Bulldog used to take part in that as well. And they are often owned by people who are cruel and aggressive characters who don't control their dogs properly and who don't care very much if the dogs attack other dogs or attack people. And we've had some deaths as a result of this tragedy, great tragedy. Now, we have good laws in this country, which can mean that the dog is destroyed and that the owner is prosecuted for not being responsible and can in fact go to jail. The problem there, Kiran, is that law's got to be enforced. I had to call out the police a year ago when a neighbour's dog, out of control, attacked my dogs. And the result was I took a fall. I ended up with a broken hip. I ended up in hospital for 10 days. And he was still walking around with this bloody dog not properly under control. And it took two goes. It took two goes before the police actually said to him, there won't be a third time. If we have to visit again, then the dog will come with us and you know what will happen. And he's not a bad man. He's just a fool. We have to be aware that, in my view, and I have dogs, there's no such thing as a bad dog. There are many bad owners. And we have to get at the owners. We have to use the law. And that means the police have got to take this seriously. The way I got the police eventually to take it seriously was to say to them, this man and his dog put me in hospital for 10 days. The next time they could put somebody in their coffin. You have to take it seriously. And eventually that's what they did. But it took a lot of effort on my part to persuade the police to take it seriously. We shouldn't have to do that.
Now, do you also think, Mrs. Currie, do you also think that the NHS, as I know that you were the junior health secretary, do you think, in your opinion, the NHS is overcrowded?
Well, my experience of the NHS recently is that it's very good and it's functioning very well. I don't think I could say that this time last year when it seemed to be very, very short of staff. And of course, during COVID, it was so much in crisis. And we had the extraordinary circumstances where I live that the breast cancer screening van was cancelled. And you can't do that. If you start cancelling preventive services, you will end up with more people, more sick, a bit further down the line. And so we campaigned to get it restored and to say, look, it's serious. It's not an optional thing. You have to do this work. And in that sense, I think we could carry some of this further forward. Innovations make a hell of a difference. For example, when I was a health minister, cervical cancer in women, which is a horrible cancer, it eats out people's insides. It's extremely painful and horrible thing to do, very difficult to treat. It used to kill something like 1,500, 1,800 women a year out of about 4,000 cases. Now we have a vaccine that youngsters get at school from the age of about 12, 13 onwards. And we will see in years to come, this will die out. That's wonderful. We've just got to the stage where we can do something similar with prostate cancer, that we can detect it early and we can treat it properly. And we should have a screening program, I think, for prostate cancer. It will help every man that's watching this. You may not need it for many years, but you will need it sooner or later. It's very, very common in older men. It's particularly common in men of African heritage. And it's important that we catch these things early. If we have a screening service, then everyone will get looked after, not just those who turn up in pain. And it seems to me that's the way forward. Now, the health service struggles to look after people who are already sick. If we can stop people getting sick earlier, that's great. That's great. We need to tackle obesity better. We need to make sure that people have good advice and good support to get through all those challenges. And that way, I think we'll be using our health service people better. The last thing we should start thinking about is reorganizing it, because that takes a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of heartache, costs a fortune, and does not improve anybody's health one bit.
Thank you very much for your words there. Now, recently, 3 months ago, I interviewed you, and I spoke to you about a very, very famous presenter from the 1950s, 60s. Then he became a DJ, etc., Jimmy Savile, right? And you are aware there was recently a documentary called The Reckoning. And it was, and when I watched the documentary, your name was mentioned inside the documentary. I know you've probably watched 1 or 2 episodes. I know it's obviously very disturbing to watch as well, and I think the public do know that. Tell me your thoughts on The Reckoning on the BBC. I know that you knew him personally, etc., etc. So you have more insight compared to someone like me. So tell me about The Reckoning, and the character Steve Coogan, do you think it was portrayed correctly?
Steve Coogan is amazing, absolutely amazing. There is actually on Netflix a 2-part documentary about Jimmy Savile, and I've managed to watch the first part of that, which is about Jimmy as he appeared to everybody. The second part is about what he actually did. Bearing in mind all the difficult news that we've had over the past 10 days or so, I'm trying to protect my own mental health, if you like, by watching some, and I will watch the rest later. My main concern, however, is that the BBC producers and the writers say that they've done in-depth research and tried to consult with everybody. Well, I tell you what, they never contacted me about it, because I would have said to them, look, Savile was an extraordinarily good charmer and very, very good at hiding what he was up to. He had the whole nation fooled. 1 million people lined the streets of Leeds when his hearse passed through the city. 1 million people. And it was only when people like his own grandniece said, I went to the funeral to make sure he was dead, that people began to have not just the courage to come forward, but there were those who heard them. When I was on Jim Will Fix It, somebody wanted him to fix it to meet me, and I was on that, as many other people were. He was very good indeed at hiding what he was up to. My husband, who was my late husband, who was a detective in the Met for many years, said that Savile was a classic psychopath, and they're often brilliant at imitating people whose behavior is impeccable, and that's how they get away with it. It told us that we have to listen more carefully.
Sorry to interrupt you there. Do you think, because I know what it was like, I don't know what it's like, but from according to my family members, etc., they say the BBC was such a powerful channel at the time, and it still is, but to an extent where Jimmy became the face of BBC. It became the front man in order to get there. Do you think Charles, Princess Diana, Broadmoor, Stoke Mandeville raising millions? I know people say, yes, it was a camouflage, right? Everyone says the same thing. But do you think the British, the BBC, they knew they made a mistake? They gave this man a stepping stone and they allowed him to do what he wanted to do?
Of course. I mean, it's hard to tell whether anyone in the BBC knew. And it would not be fair to use hindsight to blame everybody that was in touch with him. But they've been doing something not a million miles away from that with Russell Brand recently, allowing him to speak and say and be offensive and nasty and unpleasant, with women objecting and nobody doing anything about him. In fact, Russell Brand's boss was a woman. So, you can't assume that everybody is on board with the criticisms. But Savile was exceptional, I think. At least I hope he was exceptional. He was a very, very strange man. I thought he was a strange man when I met him. And my suspicion, Kiran, was that he was actually gay, and that he didn't want to be gay. It was against his religion, and that's why he behaved in such an odd fashion. That turned out to be a correct judgment that he was odd, but an incorrect judgment as to why he was odd. And let me add this as well. He was a religious man, and he did believe that when he died, he would go for judgment. And he believed that there are scales in judgment, and what you do that's evil goes into one, but you can weigh the scales by putting genuine good into the other. And he certainly did that with Stoke Mandeville, where he raised a lot of money. But that's not, I believe, what we are supposed to do. Good does not wipe out evil. Evil stands. You have to pay for evil. And in the heaven or hell that he's gone to, I hope he's paying.
Now, you've said on new TV programs that you were not responsible for giving Jimmy Savile the keys to Broadmoor, the mental health hospital. I know you've been on many TV channels before, and people have asked you, and you've said your opinion, which is very correct. You're allowed to say your opinion. Do you still believe what you've said is correct? Because you was the junior health minister. People are trying their very best to portray it onto someone. Do you think they want to blame yourself at the time, who was junior health minister, or did you realize that you made a mistake? You made a mistake. We all make mistakes.
Well, I was responsible for mental health, which included Broadmoor, It's a psychiatric hospital, a big psychiatric hospital, as well as having section criminals there. I was responsible for it for 4 months in the second half of 1988. And Jimmy Savile had been going there since the 1970s, since Barbara Castle was the health minister. And the main thing that we have in common, I mean, in other words, he was there for many, many years, decades before I came on the scene, or even my predecessor came on the scene. And the main thing that ran through all of this was that the civil servant responsible for the psychiatric hospital, as a man called, I think, Clive Graham, thought Jimmy was wonderful. So even if I'd said, no, he shouldn't be going there, we'd have had a big argument. And given that I was only in office for 4 or 5 months, responsible for that, and I was preoccupied doing other things like food safety with eggs, I don't think there's much I could have done about it, even if I'd had some worries about it. And the fact was that at the time, we did not have any worries about it. We were trying to improve life for the ordinary psychiatric patients who were in there, who had very few visitors. And he presented himself. Sorry, we've got a delay on the line.
But he was also a very suspicious character, Edwina.
Not at the time.
Sorry, Madam. I was just saying he was a very suspicious character, and it's very smart. He was a very smart individual, and you can clearly see that he was a complete narcissist. That maybe it was wrong to allow him to be part of Broadmoor, regardless if he had the keys or not, but just to be part of Broadmoor, because there was rumors, there was conversations, there was stories about him. Do you think maybe in hindsight now, it was maybe a slight error in order to give him part of Broadmoor Mental Health Hospital?
Well, of course it was. Of course it was. But that's hindsight. There were no rumors that reached me. Nobody actually stopped me in the street and said, that Jimmy Savile was a bad man. And that's true for the vast majority of people that he was in contact with. And to use hindsight now, that's fine. Of course, he shouldn't have been there. He shouldn't have been on the BBC. He shouldn't have been doing Jim Will Fix It. He shouldn't have been doing Top of the Pops. He shouldn't have been doing anything. He shouldn't have been running nightclubs in Manchester. He shouldn't have been on Radio Luxembourg. He shouldn't have been given any of the chances that he was able to exploit. But the fact is that for the majority of people that he brushed up against, there was no negative information. And all the hindsight in the world doesn't change that. I wish Jimmy Savile had never existed, and I hope he burns in hell. And for his many victims, I hope they see some recovery and that they have as good a life as possible despite their contact with him.
Moving on, I have to ask you, even though I have a very high level of respect for you, but you are known to jeopardize the farmers and egg economy by stating about salmonella in British eggs. And you said, in your quotes, most of the egg production in this country, sadly, is now affected with salmonella, and egg sales decline rapidly by 60%.
Yeah, that wasn't.
Was that a comment?
That wasn't correct. What I had in mind was that if all the eggs looked alike, only a small number of them were actually infected, but you couldn't tell by looking at the hens, because the hens themselves were young and therefore healthy. And you wouldn't be affected if you cooked the eggs. If you hard boiled them or you baked them in a cake, you would not be affected, you would kill the bug. But if you had them lightly boiled or scrambled, or if you made them into an eggnog, something where you're using raw eggs or ice cream or mayonnaise, then you could be very sick indeed. And at that time, there was no pasteurized egg available. So typically in a care home or in a hospital kitchen, the chef would break 50 eggs into a bowl. They only needed one to be contaminated, make scrambled egg for everybody, and you'd end up with half the home desperately ill. And it was killing people. It was killing people. I was not the Minister for Food. At that time, we had something called MAF, Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Food. And it was their job to make sure our food was healthy. The trouble was that they'd become a kind of trade union for bad farming, for bad farmers and bad farming. And they were absolutely determined to say that there was nothing wrong with the eggs. There was a lot wrong with the eggs. There was even more wrong with chicken. Chicken meat in this country is still contaminated. And, you know, you don't wave it round the kitchen when it's raw. It's not good stuff. You have to cook it very thoroughly. Otherwise, you can cause people serious food poisoning. I felt eventually that somebody had to warn the public, and that as public health minister, that fell to me. I seem to have done it, as you described, Kiran, a little too well. I didn't say to people, don't buy eggs. I didn't say to people, don't eat eggs. We wanted them to cook them properly. But as you say, the following week, 6 million people stopped buying eggs.
Edwina, we're going to be back.
Yeah, but there's an aftermath. There's an aftermath, which these things don't, the aftermath seldom gets.
We're going to be back.
10 years later, 10 years later, the egg industry came to me, and I was out of Parliament by then. And they said, you were right. And we need to do something to get rid of this level of infection. We are still responsible for thousands and thousands of cases of food poisoning every year. It's affecting the whole industry. We're going to get rid of it. Will you help us? And I said, well, I'm not a biologist, but the moment you can tell me that an independent testing regime shows that our eggs are not contaminated anymore, and they adopted the Lion brand to do this, then I will tell everybody. And in 2004, so that's another 4 or 5 years afterwards, that's what they achieved. And I've worked with the British egg producers ever since. It's called Brit Egg. And I'm glad to tell you that we have the safest eggs in the world. And I only wish that the rest of Europe had the same high quality, high food standards. So we got there. And I wouldn't take any money from them. All I've ever accepted from them is an egg cup, which I've got sitting in the kitchen behind me. But it ended up being a success story. It wasn't a happy story at the time, Kiran, because, you know, thousands of sick people is not a happy story. That kind of food poisoning was horrible, horrible. People were in the hospital for 6 weeks. They were on kidney dialysis machines. People have, it was really bad news. But I'm glad that these days the eggs, the ones with the little Lion brand on, they're safe.
Edwina, we're going to be back in 2 minutes. I'll be sending you a brand new link, and then we'll be on for another 10, 15 minutes. I'm going to be sending you a brand link through right now for you to connect. And back on the Political Times. We're back in literally 2.5 minutes on the national radio, on Radio Fazar.
Okay.
आपके दिल की धड़कन